Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's webinar, where we're going to be focusing on caregiver mindset. And if you notice, today's presentation is a little bit different than my normal ones. Normally, when I do presentations, I have a PowerPoint and we have a lot of order and flow, shall we say. But on this one, I don't have one. And actually, I want to let you know it's intentional. Because as we sit down, we start talking about caregiver mindset, especially family caregiver mindset. This is a conversation that can go a multitude of different ways. But I want to today talk about how important it is when you are a caregiver to make sure you have the correct mindset for that role and make sure you have the right support in implementing that role. So, one of my personal, we'll call it pet peeves, or the nails going down a chalkboard, is when I am working with families, and very often people are either coming due to a crisis situation when they've done no planning, or they've done planning and now the crisis event has happened. And now we have family members that are having to step up as caregivers for a loved one. And very often these caregivers are children of the needer or the person that needs that care. And the nails down the chalkboard that I will hear is when people start going, okay, Shannon, I can't believe that now I'm having to actually take care of mom because I've now basically become my parent's parent. And the reason that I say that that is nails down a chalkboard for me when it comes to caregiver mindset is that immediately is putting forth that position of stepping up to be able to assist your parent as though it is a position of burden. I am now the parent of parent. Further, it kind of is insulting for your loved one that you're caring for to refer to yourself as now having to be the parent of the parent. Because one, that parental relationship that I'm referring to here, that people seem to reference as what they expect caregiving to be, is that parental relationship. And that parental relationship is usually one where they're providing while the person is developing until they can be on their own. So if you're coming into caregiving with that parental parent of parent mindset, and you're going to handle the caregiving aptitude, the caregiver mindset as a parent, you need to realize you're coming into it with the wrong perspective. Because unlike a parental relationship over a child, this is not one that is going to start difficult and the person's going to become more independent until they're 100% independent. That's the parental relationship, friends. Further, it's actually kind of insulting to your parents to use that type of a mindset. And what do I mean by that? The relationship that you have with your parent is a very beautiful and an intimate one. I can guarantee everybody in the audience feels that way. But what I do want to emphasize is that if you're putting forth this aspect of burden, you're putting forth this role reversal. I'm sorry, they're always your parent. My mother was my parent all the way up until she ultimately transitioned, even though the last 2 years of her life, cognitively, she wasn't there. Physically, she wasn't there. She was compliant at best without making her own physical body even decisions, even if that decision was to sit up, sit down, stand, etc. Now, I keep telling you the mindset not to have, but actually let's start talking a little bit more about what I suggest your mindset to be. So instead of doing that parent of parent model, once again, when you're doing this, you're focusing more on this dynamic relationship with the aging parent. And that's a recipe for disaster because, especially if you're dealing with loved ones that have cognitive impairment, and yes, they do start to regress in their mental fortitude and their ability to process issues. But you should be coming at this with the whole focus of development and support. Because you got to realize their cognitive and physical capabilities, they are going to decline. And when you have that adult child in that caregiver role and they are viewed as parent of parent, they're going to start treating the parent as a child because that's the only way they know how to handle. Don't do that. Mom, you already asked that before. Mom, stop asking that. Mom, change your clothes. Mom, why can't you just take a bath? I mean, that might work with kids. It's not going to work with an aging parent. So instead of this parent-to-parent model, I challenge you guys. The proper mindset to me and the proper caregiving fortitude that you're going to need, especially as a family caregiver, is focusing a little bit more on what I refer to as the CEO or CFO blueprint of caregiving mentality or mindset. Instead of looking at it as the position of caregiver as being a burden, first of all, I want you to realize it's an honor to be able to care for loved ones as they age and they ultimately transition after health decline. It's an honor to be there, my friends. Just like it's an honor to be able to actively be engaged in a child's life, there's still an honor there in being the caregiver parent or caregiver of a parent. But in this different blueprint, I want you to think of your parent as being a Fortune 500 company. Okay? And I want you to think of yourself as the CEO or CFO of that Fortune 500 company that's mom or dad. Now, when you are looking at the caregiving role more from the position of a Fortune 500 company, suddenly you have a little bit more aesthetic distance, but also you realize that in that Fortune 500 company, it's not one person that's making that company successful. It's that CEO or CFO circling themselves with a panel of experts that complement their inability or weakness. So if we're going to start doing the CEO or CFO blueprint, and we're thinking about mom as a Fortune 500 company, what's one of the first things when you start talking to businesses they love to share, myself included? Let's talk about mission statements. If we are now going to be doing the CEO, CFO blueprint with that caregiver mindset, what's the mission? As the caregiver, and with all people that are supporting you in the caregiving needs for mom or dad, what's the mission statement? What are you focusing on here? What is your goal? What is your vision? And it could be something as simple as it's our mission to ensure the best quality of life of both parents and the caregiver. There, we know what the mission is, to ensure best quality of life, not necessarily quantity of life, but quality of life. And if you notice in this mission statement I'm using as an example, the focus is not only on the parent, but also we got to focus on the caregiver. As the saying goes, an empty pitcher cannot pour any water. Now, as we created this mission statement and we explained what our vision is to allow our parent to live as independently as possible, as long as possible, and always be in a position that focuses on dignity and grace till their ultimate transition. There's a vision for you that goes with your mission. Now, if we're talking about companies and we start talking about mission and we start talking about vision, anybody that works for a Fortune 500 company or they themselves may own their own companies, guess what's the next thing we're going to be focused on as that caregiver mindset? What's the core values that you want to make sure that you're always promoting, and anybody that assists you in that caregiving for mom or dad is always focusing upon? These core values are non-negotiable. Well, number one, maybe safety. Maybe safety is a core value that every person assisting in the care for mom or dad, safety is utmost important, is paramount. Got to make sure that mom is safe, the caregiver is safe, the environment is safe. So that might mean having to do some home improvement. That might mean sitting down and making sure that the Bathroom is properly prepared for somebody that might be a fall risk. Got to focus on safety as a core value. Now, another core value you may have is dignity. This was a big one for me with my mom. As myself and my father, we were the primary caregivers for her, mainly my father, honestly, but until our ultimate transition. And by dignity, let me give you an example of what was important to us for dignity. Now, remember, my mother's cognition had long been gone at this point. She didn't recognize us. She was nonverbal. She was basically command compliant, is the best way I can describe it. And she was also incontinent. So she was having to wear not only a catheter, but also adult diapers. How is there dignity in the caregiving here? The dignity was emphasized in two different ways. Number one, whenever my mother's diaper was having to be changed, the caregivers would make it a point to always still cover my mother with modesty, with the bed sheet or etc. as they're changing, or make sure the curtains are pulled. Yes, my mom may not have realized that there was a focus on modesty here, but the caregiver and the family, they realize it. They recognize it. So maybe that's the example of a core value. Even if my loved one cannot immediately comprehend the focus on dignity on how things are being handled, such as my mother, she was just complying to lay back and wait for her adult diaper to be changed. She may not have been overly aware of like the dignity of covering her and etc. But I'll tell you this much, everybody else in the room recognized it, and it was an expectation. I also have respect. Maybe that's another one. Not only respect for the individual that's being cared for, but for all those people that are caring for that individual. Not making it a blame game, not believing that you can kick the dog. Always have respect. Be honest. Maybe that's another core value. Clear communication. I've had several people, we start talking about core values for caregiving, they start talking about clear communication. And what is meant by clear communication? That's making sure that what you communicate can be understood by the individual. So with clear communication as a core value, essentially that's stating that whoever is speaking as part of this caregiver team, you have to know your audience and how your audience best receives information. And if you understand your audience and how they best receive information, you can have clear communication to that individual. So we're talking once again, the proper, in my view, caregiver mindset, focusing on like a CEO or CFO blueprint model instead of the parent of parent. And we just scratched the surface, my friends, about this module of how to be the CEO of your parent's life. So we talked about mission, creating a mission statement, a vision statement, non-negotiable core values of anybody and everybody that assists in the care of your loved one. Well, what else do businesses often have? Well, guess what? You have business goals or corporation goals or company goals. So as you're stepping into that caregiver role, what does that mean? Well, perhaps your goal, because your parent had asked and you want to obey by their request, perhaps one of the clearly defined goals that you can be focusing on as the caregiver is to allow that parent to live at home as long as possible if the care can be sufficiently provided and paid for with current income and assets. Now, there is a difference between a goal and a dream or an aspiration. A goal has planning that will be able to be implemented to ensure that it is going to be implemented. Where a dream or an aspiration, that's a hope, that's what you want, but dreams and hopes very seldom have planning. But a goal does. And that's why, if you heard the whole thing about living at home as long as possible, it had qualifiers here. As long as the care could be sufficiently provided and paid for with current income and assets. We don't want the caregiver going into debt unnecessarily while caring for another one. Sometimes as a caregiver, you got to make some difficult decisions, but As long as you understand your goal and how to implement the goal, if that goal can no longer be implemented due to level of care or resources, well, now you know you got to figure out a backup plan with your goals. Okay, maybe another clearly defined goal is that you're going to prepare for that plan B today. As the caregiver, always research and visit at least one facility a month to be prepared for the plan B. So that if your loved one does have to leave the home and go into assisted or skilled nursing level care, you're not going to reactively just put them in the first place that's being suggested. You've already researched it. So see, a goal here is also to make sure that you always have that plan B and you're actively preparing for the plan B. Now, this is a very important one. And if you are a family caregiver out there, you're not currently doing this. You need to put this into your caregiving plan, your mindset, and that is your own personal respite. Sit down, determine how much time do you want away from caregiving to make sure that you can always be sufficiently present for your loved ones and not potentially subject to burnout. I know with a lot of the caregivers I talk about, especially those that are doing more like 24/7 care almost, hey guys, you need to take off at least 1 week to have a mental and physical reset a quarter. So maybe that's one of the other goals, is to be able to make sure not only do you have a plan B if the health deteriorates, but let's make sure we have that plan B. So if you cannot be there to be the caregiver, you've got a plan B that can implement, especially during your respite. Now, if we start talking about all this planning and the goals, and in order to make sure these plans be properly implemented, as the caregiver and as you're doing the CEO, CFO, everything's coming down to the paperwork, even in Apple, Nike, or et cetera. If the CEO or CFO of Nike or Apple, it's all coming down to the paperwork to make sure that you have the legal authority and that there is documented plan that needs to be implemented with proper legal effect. So you want to update all those legal documents, such as the financial power of attorney, the healthcare power of attorney, advanced directives, last will and testament, to make sure that it's properly meeting the goals, the vision, and the legacy focus of your loved one you're caring for. Granted, you want to do this while they still have capacity. Sometimes, if you don't have a loved one that has capacity and this has been done, unfortunately, one of your clearly defined goals at that point might be able to get legal authority through the courts via guardianship or conservatorship so you can properly advocate for your loved one. And then another goal should be meetings, working within your expertise, but also interacting with those people who have other expertise. There's a reason that you have your CEO or CFO, but then you also have the C-suite or board of directors that's supporting them. These are people who have different expertises that come in to assist. So let's make sure, if you're looking at mom and the caregiving of mom as being the CEO or CFO of that corporate entity that is mom or dad, let's make sure that you're setting up time to meet with the experts that have expertise that you don't have. Your financial advisor, tax advisor, medical advisor, legal advisor, just to make sure that everything is in proper state as needed for both today, but also for tomorrow. And this isn't a one and done meeting. This is one you should be doing on a regularly scheduled basis. So we've talked about vision, mission, core values. We've talked about having goals set as the caregiver. So everybody knows what we're all driving for. What are we all anticipating? What else do CEOs have to focus on? Got to focus on the budget. So do you remember when we talked about our first clearly defined goals was to make sure that the person can live independently as long as possible, assuming that their healthcare needs could be met and their current financial and assets could pay for care. Well, to make sure that their financial assets can be prepared to assist in the level of care needs that might have to be hired outside of the immediate caregiver, got to make sure you have a budget here, friends. And within the budget, there's nothing amazing about this budget you're going to do for mom. Just like, honestly, there's nothing amazing about anybody's budget. You're going to be focusing on what's the income that's being received? How regularly is it being received? What are the assets, the inventory of the assets that person owns? And what's the approximate value of those assets? Okay, now what are we talking about with the monthly expenses? Do the monthly expenses, do they exceed or are they less than that monthly income coming in? Well, if the monthly income does not meet those monthly expenses, how are you, via your budget, going to ensure that the expenses are being met via assets or maybe a financial portfolio, et cetera? And also, as we're sitting down and we're thinking about budget, you also need to figure out where your watermarks are to be able to get additional care coming in, either based upon the need of the loved one, meeting a certain medical need for certain programs, such as VA pension aid and attendance. We got to make sure that that individual meets the medical need. Same thing with Medicaid. But maybe it's also figuring out when they actually have the true need and when they can properly qualify, or when you start prepping for them. For example, let's say that you sit down and you say, Mom has $250,000. And right now, we're focusing to keep Mom at home as long as possible, as long as her healthcare needs and et cetera can be met. And right now is being able to be provided. She loves her caregiver she's getting, but that caregiver is costing us $35 an hour. Well, that's going to start to deplete that nest egg of $250,000. So then the question becomes, where's the watermark that you're going to say, okay, once when we hit $100,000, we need to start strategizing a plan B to get the level of care met without fully exhausting the funds. Maybe we need to get onto Medicaid. Maybe we got to make sure that there's VA pension aid and attendance available. Maybe there's other community activities or opportunities. Just as we have this budget, we got to figure out who are the providers who are going to be assisting, those people that have the expertise, those doctors, rehabilitation centers. Sometimes it's just the day-to-day needs. Maybe it's the pet sitter, the hairdresser, yard maintenance. These are a network of providers and support for the caregiver, and make sure that you have that listed. I know that we had a folder, and in that folder, we listed out the certain people. What was their contact information, how to get in contact to them, when to get in contact with them, and what services they could provide. Keep that network of providers, because when you have the need, it's always better for some of you to have a pre-existing relationship with, or at least someone that you've already reviewed to make sure they can provide the care level that's needed. Now, just as businesses have work schedules and expectations, we want to make sure that you as the caregiver and all those people that are supporting you, that we have a definition and defined rotation of people who can call, stop by, visit, provide care, so that we make sure that not everybody wants to come in on the weekend and then you're left alone 5 days out of the week and you're fully exhausted. Let's try to make sure that we can, just like with a work schedule, make sure that we have the full schedule properly handled and that people are meeting that work schedule. And then lastly, this is so important, guys, as the caregiver, especially with the CEO, CFO mindset. And that is focusing on regularly scheduled meetings with key personnel. Suggestion: weekly meetings. Have them to discuss with your caregiving team and or family. What's the week's activities going to be for your loved one? What's the next goals that are being focused upon, or any issues that have come up in the last week or recently that haven't been resolved that we want input? The more that you're open to this communication and you're talking, the stronger your resources could be. You're going to figure out who can step up to help you. Family, make sure you have those weekly meetings with family. In my observation, when we're dealing with the caregiver situation of a family, and we have one family member doing the caregiving for another, where there's other children that just aren't stepping up, well, they don't know what's going on. Maybe they could step up, but they only understood exactly what was going on. Otherwise, you just open this up to gossip and misinterpretation. Communication. So communicate with how mom's doing, but also communicate with the siblings on a regular basis or the family members so that not only are they going to know what's going on with mom, but they can ask questions. They can give input. With your caregivers, you may have it to where, yeah, you're the family caregiver, but you have to bring in other caregivers. Have regular meetings with them on at least a weekly basis. Okay, how was this week for mom? Was there anything I should have been aware of? You can even do this as daily meetings at the end of a shift, honestly, if you wanted to. And then lastly, make sure with the key board of directors, shall I say, for your loved one, the financial advisor, the insurance advisor, the tax advisor, the legal advisor. Make sure that you're meeting with them monthly, quarterly, or at least annually, or when key events happen, just to make sure that your loved one's being properly supported. Once again, you're the caregiver, my friends, and you're looking at this as a Fortune 500 company. And as a Fortune 500 company, they're only successful through the people they circle around and through the communication they share with them. Now, we've talked about the budget, the network, etc. Now it's going to be the question about, okay, if we're going to have the equivalent of the shareholders meeting, shall I say, which is the family members, we've got the budget. And my comment is, with the budget, share the budget. Once again, that's one of the reasons shareholder meetings, they share financials. When you're having that shareholder meeting with your family members, share the financials, share the medical updates, share the status of assets, cognition. Communication is where you're going to get the support, and the planning is where you're going to get the feeling of comfort and preparation for whatever life brings you. Now, I've been talking basically for the last 30 minutes, just emphasizing the importance that as a caregiver, don't look at it as a burden. Look at it as you're CEO of the corporation, this mom. Make sure you do several of these standard business things that actually apply to caregiving: the mission, the vision, the core values, the goals. And when we're talking about goals, you can have 90-day goals, 6-month goals, 5-year goals. But know what the goals are so you can properly prepare for them. I know very often as a business owner, there's probably some out there too, people always make the comment, okay, if you have the jar, this is your jar right here. You're going to have what are called boulders. You're going to have rocks. You're going to have pebbles, and you're going to have sand. And that's kind of how you're going to prioritize. What are the big boulders you got to address? Then the rocks, the pebbles, the sand. You're not going to be able to address everything all at once. And what I'll tell you, in my observation, both professionally and personally, people overestimate what they can do in 1 year, but they underestimate what they can do in 5, which is kind of interesting. So make sure you've got the goals. Make sure you have the communication. Make sure you have the support. And make sure that you are actively engaging for support and follow-up. Out of curiosity, for those in the audience today, how many of you guys are caregivers? And if you are indeed a caregiver, presently or historically, for a loved one other than a child, go ahead and just type in chat. Just type caregiver in chat, because I'm very curious. And whether you are a current caregiver or you are a historic caregiver, what would you give as the best bit of advice to be a successful caregiver to those others that are in the audience today? Just pausing for a second because it looks like somebody's about ready to send me a question here. So I just received a question/comment from one individual that is a caregiver. And their response they actually just made to me, which is kind of interesting, is this isn't what they found for success, but they found as something that is negative for them. And that is, as a caregiver, they have a difficulty saying no. Hey, I can get that. Usually caregivers are some of the people with the most open hearts that I've ever dealt with. And as a result, you don't want to tell people no. You always want to be able to assist and build them up instead of tearing them down. But this is where Under the CEO, CFO mindset, this is why it's so important to have a plan. So you have the plan. You've got the 30-day, the 90-day, the 180, the 1 year, the 5-year plan. And when somebody comes up and says, hey, you need some help with X, Y, and Z, I would love to be able to help you. However, this quarter am focusing on this, this, and this. I don't have the bandwidth, but I can put this on a to-do within the next 6 months, next year. The planning is where you're going to be more comfortable saying the no, because then your no has a foundation instead of just an emotional response. Because a lot of times when I talk to caregivers that don't like to say no, is because it's an emotional reaction that they feel instead of a founded explanation of why they're saying no. Now I see I've got a couple other people here. I've got Amy. She has got a child with 3 siblings and designated POA, medical directive surrogate. That's excellent, Amy. When I was talking about with being the CEO or CFO of your parents' life, you got to make sure paperwork, legal authorization. Those POAs and the medical directives, so very important. Because not only is it giving you the legal authority, those also should have been completed while your loved one had capacity to actually declare out how they could best be cared for. Because although we're talking about the caregiver, I was giving all this planning, prioritization, core goals, and et cetera. At the end of the day, as a caregiver, your goal is to just make that person as comfortable as possible and live as strongly a life of significance as possible. And everybody's life of significance is differently defined. By you having those documents, Amy, which I applaud you for having, your loved one has already started to declare out what a successful life and where the focuses should be via both the powers and the directives they're giving in those documents. That's wonderful, Amy. Now, I've also got Patrice. Dad just died, so transitioned into trustee successor, having monthly meetings with the 4 siblings. That's awesome, Patrice. Because, just like I said, that's the value of shareholder meetings in a Fortune 500 company. So you actually understand what's happening and where's the money and where's it going and where does it need to go. And that gives investors much more comfort to continue to invest their time and money into that Fortune 500 company. By you having those monthly meetings with your siblings, you're doing just that. You're making sure that there's no chance for any family squabble or misconception or gossip. Y'all guys are addressing it head on to explain this is what's going on. This is where we are. This is where we want to be. This is how much farther we've gotten than last month, but this is how much longer of a road we've got. And this is where I hope, Patrice, you make the comment, okay, guys, I need some assistance with focus here or there, or let me get your guys' input. Because everybody wants to understand and people want to be involved in caregiving in whatever manner they're most comfortable doing. Sometimes people are just comfortable with brainstorming for the caregiving. Some people are going to be down in the trenches, but realize the value of this communications. That's beautiful, Patrice. So Amy just made another update here about those documents. They're drawn up in Florida, and my dad recently moved to Georgia. I need to find an attorney in Georgia to review everything, as his Florida attorney just told me he cannot help. Amy, this is something I do quite often as an attorney. I do document reviews. And I do emphasize there is an investment for me doing a document review for full disclosure. For me to spend 1 hour reviewing documents, talking over strategy, explaining where your risk points are and how to resolve it. I emphasize to you, as Dad's now in Georgia, we want to make sure that his documents are not only in proper legal format in Georgia, but also as people are aging, we got to make sure they're going to be properly supporting him, not only for today, but also tomorrow, a year from now, 10 years from now, especially focusing on a long-term care focus as you being the caregiver. So I emphasize, the type of attorney you want to review is much like myself, an estate planning attorney. And if you have not already, Amy, what I want you to do, and anybody else here in the audience today, what I want y'all guys to do is if you look at the right-hand side of your screen, you're going to see that I now just extended an offer. And there you're going to see a green Book Now button to book your initial 15-minute strategy session. This will be with a non-attorney, but this is your first step, Patrice. First step, Amy, for just making sure you're where you need to be. You have a risk assessment, start talking about a risk assessment so that that next step, for example, meeting with myself or one of my attorneys, we're going to be able to not only assess where you currently are in documents, risk, or et cetera, but explain to how you can get to those next steps. Okay? Now, Kelly, thank you so much for adding something here with Kelly also. My mother has limited assets, only a bank account, no property or car. Do I need a full legal review to update her will? I'm of the position, yes, but let me explain why, Kelly, here. So to me, the purpose of a will is going to serve two main purposes. One, for that person to state where they want their assets to go that were in their individual name at time of death. But number two is to also sit down and protect that inheritance for the people that are going to receive. Protect from themselves. So, for example, if they're an addict, we don't want them to receive outright. We want to protect them from themselves by maybe making a testamentary sub-trust stating that instead of gambling Gary or alcoholic Al receiving outright, it's going to go into a trust and they're going to receive some form of a stipend entitlement. But also it's going to protect from others, whether that be a person that has special needs, to protect those funds while not negatively affecting their governmental qualification, or maybe somebody's a minor, etc. Now, as you reference limited assets, that makes it all the more important to make sure that things are properly set up. Now, yes, the goal to me always is to try to avoid probate as much as possible. But if you have to go through probate, have that plan to explain how it's going to handle. Let's go back to my example of businesses. Businesses that are going to sell or they're going to close their doors, kind of like if your mother is the LLC or the corporation, the Fortune 500 company, upon her death, that company is going to, I'm putting quotes here, close. Well, you always have to have a business succession plan or a winding up a business plan. That's your will. Okay. And also, I want you to realize that just because you don't have assets today doesn't mean that you won't have them tomorrow. And your comment, Kelly, may be, well, come on. What's mom going to do? She's not going to go out and start working again or marry some real estate tycoon. No. But you never know when they might have a legal entitlement. Let me use a prime example of my grandmother. My grandmother died before I was born. She died in 1972. I was born in 1973. And she was the proud military mother who raised 4 girls for over 5 years at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina. When she died of rheumatic poisoning and kidney failure. Well, at that time, back in 1972, she didn't really have anything. And the last thing you'd ever think is that she would have become part of a class action lawsuit. But guess what? Her symptoms and cause of death are the standard symptomatic results of the water poisoning in Camp Lejeune. So, approximately 50 years after her death, my aunt had to open up a probate estate in order to join that class action. So, I use it as just a true example of my own personal life here. I had a person that died with no assets, but we still are thankful there was a will there for the purposes of 50 years later after her death, where there now is a class action. Now, I do also agree, Kelly, you don't have to go into overly extensive like trust and et cetera, but we at least want to have your 3 foundational documents everybody over the age of 18 should have, Kelly. And this is what you as the caregiver want to make sure that your mother has. Financial power of attorney, a healthcare power of attorney, and a last will and testament. Those are the 3 foundational documents everybody that is over the age of 18 should have. So while I don't think there will be like over complexity in strategy, in regards to like asset preservation or handoff, there's still a lot of strategy needs to be done for her lifetime under those powers of attorney, and just to be prepared with whatever might happen or her have an ownership interest in at time of death or subsequently thereafter based upon her cause of death. So Amy asked one more follow-up question here, as I was suggesting to her that she does want to sit down and have those documents reviewed and to at least start with the strategy session. They'll explain how to get on my calendar to do that doc review. I want to emphasize to you, your question is, should your dad be on the call or just you? Well, that if you're scheduling the initial 15-minute strategy session, I think that only needs to be you. But if you're coming in to meet with me, which is actually what I suggest, because that's where you're going to get the true document review, assuming that your father has capacity, I would have your father join you, because at the end of the day, if I have to redraft anything, your father would be my client, not you. So I want him to be comfortable with me, but also I want to make sure about how his capacity is doing, and I want to hear his voice, because within these documents, we're trying to preserve the voice of your loved one, okay? And I can't preserve that person's voice if I've never interacted with them to understand what's important to them and where their goals are, okay? This has been some really good interaction we've been having here. Out of curiosity, does anybody else have anything they would like to share, either as successes or challenges of being a family caregiver? Okay, it looks like I do have another question that came to me individually. One second here. The people that send me things individually, I try to be polite and not say their name, because usually there's a reason they didn't choose to put it into the general chat. So let me read this really quick, okay? Okay. So this is kind of interesting, because this person who just sent me this chat, they were asking a question / making a declaration explaining that they are a family caregiver. They have 2 elderly parents, one that needs more supervision than the other, and expressing when do they step in to the caregiver role stronger than they are right now, because they want to respect the spouse that's trying to care as a primary for the spouse that truly does need care, but the other one's kind of on the borderline of needing care. I'm kind of summarizing how this person just asked this question here. It's pretty lengthy. And here's my comment that I have. It all comes back to communication one more time. Do you remember how Patrice emphasized that she has monthly meetings with her siblings? Well, fine. Let's say that dad is the primary caregiver of mom, kind of like my dad was for my mom. Still have monthly meetings at a minimum. Still ask dad, we have monthly meetings just how mom's doing. And when you're sitting there and you're trying to figure out when to step in, have an open and honest communication with dad. Explain to dad that you're not here to take away the role from him. You're here to help him so he can more strongly serve in that role. Spouses, I saw this with my dad, very dedicated to being able to ensure that their spouse is being properly cared for. And as with most of us, we believe we're the best person who can ever give that type of care. But you still are going to need respite. My father still needed respite. And I noticed before I got more actively engaged in my mom's, my biggest thing was constantly calling, communicating with my dad. And not only was I asking how mom's doing, I always focused on how he's doing. And what originally started out as, oh, everything's fine, everything's good, everything's great, don't worry about it. It slowly transitioned because I was asking the question repeatedly. They started to be a little bit more open. And that's where I saw my ability to come in to assist in the care. And when I started assisting with my mom's care, my dad became more confident in my ability to serve in that role. So as I started suggesting to my dad, hey, why don't you just let me do that, Dad? My dad became more comfortable because he had already seen me step into that role gradually instead of thrusting upon me. And also he knew it was something I wanted to assist with and not something he was thrusting upon me. So I don't know if that answered your question, but what I just emphasize is communication, communication, communication. Because by having that communication with your parent, that honestly can't truly care for the loved one as strongly as you believe that one needs care, don't go in and usurp all of the power, but go in there softly, but deliberately and repetitively to be there. Fine. If the comment is, no, I don't want you bathing, or I don't want you feeding, I don't want X, well, guess what? Then constantly show up at the house around mealtime. And when dad needs that, so let me get that for you, dad. Oh, dad, why don't you go ahead and get that phone call? I'll sit here. I'll finish feeding mom. It's good. Don't worry about it. Oh, mom needs a bath. Here, dad, just sit down. You're watching Wheel of Fortune. I got this for you. Don't worry about it. Just be focused like that, because it is very seldom are people immediately thrust in, at least at the beginning. Usually there's a group of people that want to help out in the caregiving. And there's usually one key one that does most of the caregiving. But that doesn't mean that that person can do it all on their own, or that they should do it all on their own. Just continue to be there for the person. Well, I'm trying to see if there's any other updated questions or comments. These have all been great shares that you guys have had. Not only identifying what you are doing, how it's being successful for you, but also some of the troubles and the struggles and the confusions as the family caregiver about how to address. But what I would like to emphasize at this point is thank you guys so very much. I know we're ending a little bit earlier today because this is all just one for us to have conversation. And if you are a family caregiver, and if you are not currently in some type of a support group or have somebody to talk to, you need to speak to people. You need to have that support. You do not have to do this all on your own. Have your C-suite, have your board of directors, have those shareholders you're having those meetings with. Communicate, and you need to be open when you need help. You cannot do this all on your own. And as you're doing it, realize being able to be there, it is an honor. But as it is an honor, treat it as such with that much respect. So with that, my friends, hopefully this has been somewhat beneficial for everyone. I want to thank everyone for attending. We do webinars like this every Thursday. A lot of them are PowerPoints, like what I said. This has to be more of a conversational. But thank you so much for attending today. And with that, have a great weekend, guys, and we will touch base again next week. Bye-bye.